again that, as you know, you are encouraged, as per the judging manual, to take 3 POIs across each team and to take 1 POI per speaker. Failure to do so may be constituted as a lack of engagement, and this may affect our deliberation. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to open the case that stands in opening government's name. Here.
Hi, just confirming that I'm audible and visible.
Yes, I confirm that you're audible and visible. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I start my speech, since this is being streamed, I would just like to say that this is competitive debating and my views do not reflect any of my current, past or future employers. So just getting out of it, it's just competitive debating just on the basis of that. All right, so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The rise of hustle culture and the annoying social media that is LinkedIn has led to more sadness than happiness in the world. And that's what opening government is going to prove today. What we want is very simple. We oppose the pressure to focus on promoting one's career at the expense of forming a family. This means that in order to counteract that, if there are narratives that promote the idea of family, that provides importance to the concept of family, that promotes the importance that you need to go back to your home, spend time with your family, have a good relationship with your kids, parents, and so on and so forth, we're more than happy to promote these narratives that counteract the forces that exist in terms of that. But most importantly, we oppose the narrative that your career needs to take priority at the expense of your family. And that's the most important thing within this debate. We stand for a world where that does not exist. We stand for a world where it's more normalized in a lot of ways to either prioritize your family. Some people would obviously be prioritizing career over family. We think that's acceptable. But for the vast majority of individuals, it's important what social narrative exists and so on and so forth. A few things in opening government. Firstly, I'm going to prove to you why is it that our side of the topic gives you more fulfillment generally. Secondly, I'm going to talk about even if it gets equal level of fulfillment to equal number of people, why interpersonal fulfillment is better than materialistic fulfillment, something that we promote interpersonal fulfillment in our world. And lastly, I'm going to prove why our narrative leads to better work culture within corporations and within workplaces more generally for everyone. And that's a net benefit for everyone. So firstly, assuming that both pursuits give you fulfillment, because obviously your career gives you some level of fulfillment, obviously your life with your family also gives you fulfillment. Why is it that under our world more people have access to that fulfillment? Because the framing here is very important. If you create a social narrative where you say that, oh, you need to pursue your career at the expense of your family, what you're saying is someone who is pursuing their career at the expense of their family and getting successful at it deserve a higher status within society more generally, and this is something that we ought to go after. At that particular point in time, someone who then goes for family life or prioritizes their family life do not get a same level of fulfillment because of existing social narratives, which means that there is a trade-off in this particular sense. Why do we think that when it comes to fulfillment, it is better for you under our sides? Number one, because the nature of the capitalist system means that it is a pyramid structure. So what do I mean by this? Obviously, there are CEOs in companies. Beyond that, you have vice presidents. Beyond that, you have executives and so on and so forth. As you move up the ladder in any career, it may be something like a McDonald's branch where you start off as a cashier and then move your way up to manager. It can be a big corporation. In any of these structures, number gets fewer as you go up, which means that these positions of success, these positions of monetary benefits get restricted to fewer and fewer people by design, because that's how capitalist society works within hierarchical systems, means that the access to that is barred in a lot of cases. In comparison, access to family is far easier because society has set up generally easier means through which you can access and form families. So for example, in a lot of societies, it is access to things like marriages that are prioritized to a large extent, but also even in Western societies and stuff, you have dating apps and stuff like that allow you to connect with people in one way or the other, finding love and so on and so forth. But also there is a biological and sociological drive to form a family, which means that it gets easier for you to form a family in those particular instances, means that it's far more easily accessible for you to gain fulfillment from this. Number two, because oftentimes when it comes to corporations and so on and so forth, there is an artificial external barrier that keeps you from getting success. So mind the fact that women earn 79 cents to $1 that a man earns, means that there exists glass ceilings for women, but also glass class ceilings for particular races, ethnicities, depending on whether or not you are a minority and so on and so forth. Subtle racism is still a thing, meaning that in a lot of these cases, the access to that success is often restricted to a very few demographic groups because of socio-political happenings that are symmetric in both sides. Under our world, you are barred from accessing, under their world, you're barred from accessing these successes oftentimes because of your identity, whereas under our world, you are not barred from accessing these things because in a lot of cases, you can form a family which is more accessible to individuals such as minorities and so on and so forth. Number three, because in a lot of cases, when it comes to capitalistic structures, you feel like you're replaceable, right? Because you realize that you can be replaced by someone else. Oftentimes you're threatened to be fired. Oftentimes you feel like your work can be done by someone else. Oftentimes you feel like you're just a cog in a bigger machine. In those circumstances, you feel more replaceable as opposed to your family, where you are an integral part regardless. You're regardless a brother, you're regardless a sister, you're regardless someone's a wife or a husband or a parent or a child, so as to speak. And these are important positions that you can take, which is not true in the case of corporations or careers more generally, which means that fulfillment is more accessible to people. Before I move on to materialistic stuff, I'll take since yours doesn't have one.
We're defending the status quo, and yet in the status quo, the vast majority of people still get married eventually. Why do you believe that familial relationships are so impossible on your side of the house to opt into?
No. Obviously, most people get married. That's not the problem. And we agree to that. That's not the problem. The problem is, where do you derive your fulfillment from? Do you derive your fulfillment from the fact that, oh, I go back to my house and then I see the face of my partner and then get happiness out of that? Or do I derive fulfillment from getting success in a career? What we are saying is that getting success in a career is far harder to get fulfillment from. That's particularly problematic. Materialistic fulfillment versus interpersonal. We think in terms of framing, in a world where you prioritize careers on top of family is where you by default prioritize materialistic stuff. Because what does a career give you? It gives you money. It gives you access to a lot of privileges and benefits that are attached to careers and so on and so forth, which makes it a more materialistic world than an interpersonal world. The reason this becomes very difficult to access in terms of happiness is because of the simple reason that you judge yourself on a comparative scale. Because money, the CEO has more money than a vice president, the executive has less money than a vice president, and so on and so forth. You keep comparing yourself, and it's very difficult to gain happiness in those circumstances, versus the love of your family members is something that is accessible to everyone. It's easier to access for everyone, and it's something that it's far easier to obtain more generally, which means the interpersonal fulfillment A is easier to obtain, but B is easier to fulfill you because you're not comparing yourself to anyone and everyone all the freaking time, because you are happy with what you have. You're happy with the fact that you get to meet your kids at night, which means fulfillment of family has no comparison metric with someone else that makes you unhappy, but like materialistic fulfillment does. Lastly, why it leads to better work culture more generally, because we think that a world in which where there is a hidden expectation of you to prioritize your career on top of your family is a world where corporations get away with not giving you bonus payments for extra work, is a world where corporations get to enforce 9 to 7, 9 to 8 work hours instead of 9 to 5, because that is a norm that is accepted. In our world, it's better for you to have work-life balance. The reason this is then better for groups like women is because in both worlds, it is symmetric that women have a pressure to fulfill things at home and essentially get along with a lot of tasks that are expected out of them. Under our world, careers are more accessible to them because you have better work culture structures that are more conducive to generally women's participation within the economic force. That is something that is proven and something that Sajid will expand upon. Incredibly proud to propose.
I thank the previous speaker for the verifying speech. I would like to invite the leader of the opposition to open the case for opposition. Yeah.
Cool. Can I confirm I'm clearly audible?
Yes, I confirm you're clearly audible.
Great. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Before I get into constructive and explain why this narrative is better for the individual and society, I want to do a point of framing that I think marginalizes most of the opening government case. I don't think this debate is about opting out en masse from relationships or even opting out to a great degree. I think on either side of the house, people are likely to settle down eventually. The question is when they do it, and if they do it in a manner that is optimized for them to derive all of the benefits from fulfillment that Sajid and Sori consider to be so important. Where does this narrative likely apply? I think this narrative likely applies and is most salient in your early career, right? When you're starting out, i.e. when you're entry level or relatively early on in your career, i.e. middle management at the absolute most. The reason why this is the case is because when you reach your middle age and are further along in your career, there is tons of pressure and relatively low barrier pressure on you from external and countervailing influences to settle down. This looks like your internal biological clock telling you that it won't last forever and you need to procreate at a certain point in order to do so. This looks like your family and your friends putting pressure on you not to be an old maid or an old bachelor and trying to set you up with different different people in your community. This looks like the fact that you see other people in your community settling down and feel psychosocial pressure to do so. This looks like the fact that the vast majority of the world is religious, and religious texts exist in either world that tell you your duty is to procreate. What this means is that there are pressures that exist externally to the motion that eventually push people towards having a family. And it also means the pressure on opposition side, government side, is to form a family far earlier, and opening government 100% concedes this in their framing when they say they amplify that narrative. What our narrative is most salient at doing is telling you when you are in your early or middle career path, it is important to prioritize the success of your career, working hard and promoting it in order to attain stability and derive fulfillment from whatever you like to do. In other words, if you believe familial fulfillment is more accessible and somehow better, it will be accessible eventually on either side. The difference is, and the comparative in this debate is incredibly important, you will be in more of a position to enjoy that fulfillment when you have pressure on you to move towards prioritizing your career over prioritizing family in the interim. I have two extensive responses to opening opposition before I get into constructive. Firstly, I just contest it is hard to get fulfillment out of career. Firstly, just empirically, there are a broad array of options for work, and they are diversifying every year as remote work becomes far more available, as professions become more diversified, as there are more and more jobs that exist in society as we continue to advance in technology. Secondly, even if you don't make it, success isn't absolute in an absolute sense, i.e. you don't make it to the top of the corporate hierarchy and become Michael Scott, there are tons of annoying middle managers who enjoy their jobs empirically, right? Like there are so many Karens who love pushing papers on their desk and enjoy every minute of that kind of work. So you don't need to be at the top of the corporate hierarchy to derive success from that. They're just wrong on that premise. But thirdly, when there is a pressure narrative to promote your career, you have incentives to opt into a career you like, right? Because if you are promoting your career day in and day out and working very hard on it, you are likely to take in the advice from people that you better be promoting something that you enjoy, or at least attempt to enjoy it to the best of your degree. But finally, this is dubiously comparative, right? Because insofar as you can't derive pleasure from work because it fluctuates a lot and economically things are unstable, relationships often have highs, lows, pleasure in them is very subjective. And as I'll prove in a minute, they can often really suck if you're poor, which is more likely on their side of the house. Then they say, when people feel more pressure to work hard, they'll optimize in such a way that means that you don't get family benefits or something like this. This is really silly, because if you're optimizing for success, our narrative is necessarily one of balance. Because if you feel pressure on promoting your career, it's not just a narrative about working, it's a pressure to succeed at work. This means you likely accrue a narrative of balance, because when the narrative is oriented around work success, i.e. succeeding in your career, you are likely to internalize messaging like breaks are important in order for you to be maximally productive. It's important for you to be doing something you enjoy in order to derive pleasure from that kind of thing. Empirically, women opting to the labor force in a massive amount has just given more benefits in general. I have no idea why that's not the case. Why do you make better choices on our side of the house? I'm going to start it with the benefits to the individual. Note on framing when you are young, you have less dating experience because your preferences aren't fully formed. You have limited travel and exposure to different people, meaning preferences aren't entirely clear yet. And you have limited work experience. You have trouble navigating specific career paths and have a lack of information. But finally, and this is the most critical, you have limited financial funds, right? Because you're starting out, you're working paycheck to paycheck. And this is critical because it means provision for your significant other, your family is very hard. What changes on our side of the house at this critical juncture? It's the most important impact in the debate, because these are the people who are the most salient in terms of impact. If they fail, then they're fucked. If they succeed, then they're great. If they achieve a median, then they're better off. Firstly, when you're pressured to promote your career, you're vastly more likely to consider long-term prioritization far more, i.e. what additional education you need, like going to law school, opting into a master's degree, where you want to live, or moving into an area with an industry that has jobs for your specific skill set. The comparative is you are likely to feel pressure to settle down faster, or if you already have a family, to focus less on optimizing to be able to provide for them financially. As an illustration, this looks like if you're an entry-level employee, you're more likely to prioritize a promotion that comes with relocation over remaining in the small town you grew up in and swiping it multiple times on Tinder, or prioritizing a high-earning career with a path to promotion over dedicating that one extra night with your family. It is a small trade-off, but it is a trade-off that insulates you from the worst economic risks significantly and insulates you from a lot of problems. Secondly, you're likely to feel less pressure to settle down early. What the countervailing pressure on Gov does is you need to prioritize family over work. This ties you to one location far more, and you are far more stuck in one place and far more likely to be pressured to settle down faster. Now, Up might say, you have more time to explore your dating preferences. Even if this is true, you are far better able to know what you truly like when you're a bit older on one hand, so we preclude that. But secondly, insofar as you are financially stable, this is far more conducive to having a healthy relationship. Even if you end up marrying the wrong person or something like this, you're just far likely to be happier with them at the point at which you're financially stable, even if they're not like 100% perfect to your soulmate or whatever. But thirdly, the pressure incentivizes you to actively seek out information about how to advance your career path, right? Because when you care a lot about this and you feel pressure to promote yourself, you're significantly more likely to accrue and attract means toward economic stability in a variety of instances. This means rather than going on that 5th Tinder date, you instead look at and browse LinkedIn, for example, instead of, you're doing these kinds of things. But finally, when you do start a family, which you're likely to do on either side, you likely started in a better financial position, i.e. you have sunk a good degree of time into advancing, accruing paychecks and savings, and also you have the information about how to save, which means you're far more likely to, firstly, one, have more financial capital to provide for your children, this is critical, but have less stress at the opt-in point to the relationship because you're more financially stable. Before I unpack that, closing.
The pressure to be able to provide for your family always exists. People who ignore this pressure on your side of the debate would probably not be swayed by this pressure either.
I don't think they ignore that pressure, right? I think what this does is on the margins make you more likely to prioritize your career in junctures when it is critical in your life, when you could be seduced easily by the siren song of your narrative on your side. And I want to make the comparative very, very clear on weighing. In either world, people will settle down eventually. The question is whether or not they do it in a financially stable position. Our world sets you up for far more success in terms of being in a position to have a family in the first place. So we're logically prior to all of those benefits. But you also get less unhappy families, right? Because you're more financially stable in general, right? Your family suffers less, even if it doesn't exist in the first place. Why is hustle culture good if you believe this is the most important clash? Firstly, you're able to find more fulfillment. Interpersonal fulfillment is highly, highly subjective. It's incredibly unclear whether or not you can derive pleasure from it. Many people don't enjoy relationships. Family can be incredibly stressful. The comparative is that the diversity of careers gives people a lot of different options to opt into, even if you don't succeed. But even if you believe family is more fulfilling, you're able to experience that fulfillment to a far greater degree when you insulate yourself from economic shocks, instability far likely. But finally, access to family is easier because a happy family is easier because you're more likely to be able to provide for your family. It's less of a drain on resources. It takes you down, right, on their side. And there's less stress because when you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's far harder to derive fulfillment from that kind of thing. On the metric of fulfillment, we clearly win by proving you opt in at a better point to family on our side of the house. But we prove for the people who need this narrative the most, it creates the impetus for the social change that is the most important. Incredibly proud to stand in opening up.
I thank the previous speaker for the very fine speech. Invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for opening government. Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, I confirm that you're audible.
Cool.
Actually, could I just pause you for a moment? I understand that one of the wings has dropped off the call. I assume you're going to give... Yep. Oh, you're back. All right, perfect. Yep, whenever you're ready, you can go.
Just a bit of water before I start. Just a second. Starting in 3, 2, 1. All are very quickly going to go out of this debate. The first thing they base their case on is this narrative being prevalent at early points in time. This is because for some reason you care about your family later on and you don't do this naturally early on. The first response is, presumably if they can fiat that there are natural forces to care about their family later on, if we increase that time barrier and accelerate it, if you care about your family early, you would also care about their well-being going forward as well, which would create a natural push for you to earn money now so you can pay for your family going forward. So if anything, their benefits of having a family later are symmetric, because that's also an argument why people would not opt out of working altogether and would think about their families going forward and would want to earn money so they can see their children do well. Number 2, it is not true that you can just earn or get a family randomly after 10 years of not talking to them or spending time with them. Relationships often need work. So when you start distancing yourself from your friends or your brothers and your mothers, these relationships are often hard to reverse 10 years down the line because they have a new set of experiences which you can't relate to, and vice versa. Thirdly, assuming that this debate is only about 10 years, their comparative has to be why in those 10 years, the fulfillment of your career is inherently better. We've argued that at any point in time, even if it is for 5 minutes, the access and the inherent fulfillment of capitalistic structures is far worse, regardless of how much time this is for. First reason is because of the nature of the capitalistic structure being a zero-sum game. The second reason, because of artificial barriers for specific groups of people, like glass ceilings and racism for minorities. The third, that you feel it's an individualized struggle because of the way the narrative works. You need to work hard to get better. So you often ignore structural barriers that are placed onto you. And even when you get a promotion, even though you may feel good for a second about the fact that you got a promotion, when you see that there are 500 other people on your level and there's so many years and so much more hard work to do, you feel exhausted and you feel part of a wheel that is never ending. So true fulfillment from you feels unheard of because you are replaceable and you're just another person in the wheel. The only response to all of this analysis from PM is, work is becoming more available. Assertive assertion at best. I would argue work is becoming less available because of the natural trend of technology advancing, with things like automation slowly replacing labor, with the dependence on human capital being replaced by artificial technological capital. The need for humans is at an all-time low. The second thing they say is, but you still judge yourself basis the fact that you struggled, with no actual analysis of how you judge yourself basis that. You always compare. That's why I feel bad about the fact that I haven't won Worlds, despite the fact that I'm still one of the best debaters of my region. That's why the basis of comparison is always better when you have an individualized, privatized family where your child is your own and you take ownership over that child, or the fact that your brother is your own and you don't have to share. The fact that humans don't like sharing is an inherent trait of humans that makes capitalistic struggles far worse to derive fulfillment from. The last thing they say is, under this point, is there's always a natural incentive to take breaks, like 5 minutes. Like, guys, this is mitigatory at best. You will only take those 5 minutes breaks at a point in time where it is a conduit for you to recharge and work. So in those 5 minutes, you're always thinking about work to begin with. But guys, we should take breaks for 10 hours a day, not 5 minutes. You only compare yourself to the next person. So the moment you see that someone else is better than you, you have an incentive to cut this break short. Mental health deteriorates far more than it should. The next thing they say is you're always going to make short-term trade-off, long-term trade-offs, and make a lot of short-term costs in the process. Like the fact that you'll be stuck in one place, which will harm your career. The first thing I would posit is this norm uniformly applies. So all people presumably start thinking about their family to a greater degree. At this point in time, your competition for these spots is worsened out or evened out equally. So even if you think about that one spot less, others think about it less as well. So your ability to compete for spots is equal on both sides and is symmetric. Number two, I would argue early rushing for success in your career is just objectively bad. The first reason is because it is unclear they've proven that the access to this success exists for most people. So this argument is only valuable if they prove most people get short-term success. Success is more difficult the moment you make the time span even shorter. Like, how many of us are going to earn $1 million in 5 years, which is presumably what most debaters would get fulfillment from. The second is the artificial barriers to short-term success, things like age, things like you don't have a degree from Harvard, so you need 10 to 15 years to get that success. Those make short-term success even more difficult. Lastly, even if you get short-term success, best case scenario, you earn $1 million in 5 years. I would argue that this success is bad. This is because your success is measured through capitalistic means, i.e. the amount of money you've earned in that short-term span of time within 5 years. Often you get locked into specific skill sets and careers that are bad for you in the long run to start that family that you want so very dearly at the age of 35. So when you become an investment banker and your desired work-life hours are 18 hours a day, the moment you move up to a more senior position within that investment bank, that pressure only increases. You saw investment banking as the quickest success mechanism or the quickest way for you to earn money without factoring in your family and the fact that it may have long-term costs on your family. So career choices that often prioritize short-term success often become the biggest deadlocks to having a family in the long run, which is why short-term success is so very powerful. If anything, we're happy to trade this off because we've again proven with no response that the access to fulfillment is greater and the inherent fulfillment, because you don't measure yourself through a common metric of money, but through individualized, personalized relationships that other people cannot take ownership over, the ability to get fulfilled is better. Before further positive material, I'll take OO.
Yeah, look, in the developing world and in minority communities, which often trend to have this narrative far stronger due to their fact being more conservative, they're often more religious, things like the patriarchy exist. These narratives are far more salient, which means that women lose their defense mechanism to say, I'm focusing on my career right now.
15 seconds over. Why does this get better for women? There are inherent incentives to include women in the workforce regardless. First, you want to maximize output as an economy. All politicians don't want 50% of their labor force to be completely unused at home. This is the exact reason why the most conservative societies like Bangladesh, Malaysia have included the greatest number of women in the workforce, with things like the garments industry being completely dominated by female labor at a point in time where you needed that labor to make this the most important industry of Bangladesh. At a point in time where there's a natural incentive to include women at work, what becomes perverse for women is when they have to prioritize the work-life culture and the things that men need to do, like stay at work till late or not take pregnancy leaves, because that's the natural demand. You have to hustle. You have to get the quickest success in the shortest amount of time. The ability to negotiate for things like daycare centers and the ability to have pregnancy leaves happens when family is a prioritized narrative and all of them can collectivize and demand for it. Time's Up that shows women are better served in our world because there's a natural incentive to include them regardless. Very glad to win this debate.
I thank the previous speaker for the very fine speech. I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to close the top half of this debate. Here. Thank you.
Great. For POIs, please put them in the chat. Don't verbally interrupt me because it throws me off my game. Matt, could you do me a favor and put some water into this? Great. Three, two, wait, so just making sure. Yeah, I have all my notes. Great. 3, 2, 1. This is the third time I've gone up against Sajid and Soradev at this comp, and I think it's safe to say that the phrase "an old dog can learn new tricks" is fundamentally false. Let's get into dismantling their case and explain to you why I win from DLO. Firstly, a bit of weighing. If there's a pressure on either side, why is our kind of pressure better and more fulfilling and you outweigh for our side, i.e. the pressure to start a career over family? Let's dismantle what OG says first. One, that there's a hierarchy in capitalism, so there are fewer and fewer positions and you feel like you're part of a wheel. Sure, but note they don't respond to Matt's analysis, which is you can still find fulfillment not in the absolute, but relatively. That is to say, you can find happiness in getting promoted, even if you aren't the CEO, or the little dopamine hits that actually exist within the job in and of itself. But also note, and this is important, the pressure to focus on a career means the grind feels less shitty because you believe it is something meaningful. On either side, note, you have to work. If you are told it is fulfilling, it artificially makes you feel like it is worthwhile. And this is critical, what makes you feel fulfillment is socially constructed and malleable. If we tell people the things that they inevitably have to do in the workplace are something they ought to be fulfilled by, it essentially like short circuits the reasons not to feel good about it. But secondarily, family is far more accessible and they make you feel less replaceable. This is particularly why you don't need a pressure to focus on family, because it's so much more accessible for all of the reasons they give you, and there's low barriers of entry to doing it. So in other words, it is likely that it is still accessible and they still ground you and provide the good source of like euphoria and reinforcement that you otherwise need. But thirdly, they say glass ceilings and it's largely restrictive. Note this pressure counteracts these restrictive narratives and culture and these structures. The pressure being distributed across all people on our side with this narrative means you create incentives for society to provide information about how to advance, because our narrative creates a common struggle that now everybody opts into. You get more webinars about how I made it. As an illustration, this looks like minority communities telling their children, you must work very hard to advance or you're fucked. This pushes you to break glass ceilings and get the benefits. Or you have more women going to positions of power that provide more opportunities and information to other women. You see previous paths of the girl bosses navigating those tough decisions and trade-offs. I think minorities are likely the ones under most pressure from Gov's narrative, right? Because minority communities tend to be more conservative, often more religious, and this narrative is far more salient among them. The same with the pressure on women. What this means is that women and minorities are the most likely to self-select out of work on their side, which means that they work less. When they work less, the white men who experience the narrative to differential degrees are likely to take up more of those positions. This means that when there are far fewer women and minorities in the workforce, they cannot collectivize to the same degree. When a company has 40% workforce that is women, you're obviously far more likely to get better corporate policy. On their side, and they can see this, people, especially women, are far more likely to opt out of work at the critical junctures where they needed to be working more. But also in the developing world, where the pressures to settle down and focus on your family are overwhelming. This is the countervailing narrative that women who don't want to settle down use as a defense against their conservative parents. They say, I'm focusing on my career right now that everybody in society tells me is valuable, and I ought to be doing. The response is there are inherent incentives to include women in the economy on either side. Yes, but they selectively opt out far more based on the narratives that they consume. And for women who really don't want families, they lose their defense mechanism that they can otherwise tell their family. This is how you get policies like maternity leave, like anti-discrimination, because minorities are far more represented at every stage in the corporate ladder. Secondarily, on pressure, the pressure for success means you create avenues to succeed, which means you create pressure on companies to provide more clear paths to success and information about what is needed to succeed. And thirdly, the pressure to form one's career, generally speaking, means when more people are career-oriented, what this does, it creates pressure on society to provide things otherwise like childcare, etc. Because people say, I need to focus on my career and I need to have something to make sure my child doesn't otherwise starve. So I think at the very least, if you don't buy the flip, you buy everything else that I just gave you. Let me give you some reasons why we outweigh that if you buy nothing else that I've said. If there's some trade-off on fulfillment, it's better to have this pressure on career than more likely to gain fulfillment when prioritizing your career, assuming we don't know everybody's preferences and which choice will maximize their outcomes. One, a career is a clear and measurable criteria. It's clear to know what you have to do to to essentially progress along that line. The comparative is there is no clear criteria to get fulfillment out of a family. Every family's fucking different. Secondarily, you have substantially more information, i.e. you could look at previous people in the career and what they did to succeed. It's the same playing field. The comparative is on everybody's path to a family is different because every human being is different, whereas careers follow similar structures based on the institutions that form it. But secondarily, it likely fulfills a wider set of preferences because it's oriented around individual passions that everybody has and money, which is a prerequisite to agency and the ability for somebody to exist in a capitalist society. But thirdly, it's comparatively more within your control, i.e. forming a family and dating relies on somebody else's actions and preferences that you cannot control. Yes, it's hard to exist on with other people like your boss, but you can control your own actions and the way you improved from the previous point. The impacts of all of this is that in the process, we don't know how many people will succeed on either starting the family that they want or the career they want, or what their preferences are, and if they will be happy with their choices on either side. But it is comparatively more likely when you base your fulfillment on the criteria I just gave you, it is a clearer blueprint to getting that utility and fulfillment because it provides the clear measurable criteria and all of the things that I said before. But even if you buy none of that and you think family is the only way people can be happy, I'm going to explain to you why in this section, even if you believe family is just going to be more fulfilling, you're better suited to start a family that is more fulfilling to you on our side. On either side, you likely start a family or are pressured to for the reasons Matt gave and CG agree with. Now, Gov might say, you can maybe experiment more and dedicate much more time to dating. I don't think this matters that much because you can still date to some extent people within your career and find out what you like and don't like from dating on our side. But before explaining more of that, I'll take CG quickly. CG, do you have a POI?
Yeah, Ahmed, could you please explain to me what's more important to a kid, having their father give them more attention or having $10,000 more when they inherit?
This is beautiful because this part right now, I'm going to explain to you why the father is more suited to be able to play catch with his kid. Look, on op, even if you don't buy that, why is a better financial and career position or dedicating more time to your career means you're more likely to get a better family. Matt gave you a bunch of reasons, but here's why the decisions in career matter in particular for creating a happier family that allows it to be more fulfilling, which responds to CG's POI. Finances dictate the conditions for love and how much of a family person you can be, affording the bills, having health insurance, not fighting and creating a divorce for little Timmy. Love cannot thrive if the conditions for it do not exist. But secondarily, and this is critical, you have more information about what you want out of your career. Do you enjoy it? Do you really want that promotion after spending 10 years in it? Focusing on your career more means you have more security and information about how much of your life you want your career to consume, where you want to live, and what trade-offs you want to make for your family. It is better that people prioritize their career up to the age of 30 or 40 before they have to start a family than once they change their minds after they've started a family. So we essentially short circuit all of Gov's analysis and take it. Fuck all of the dinos, including Matt. Love you.
I thank the previous speaker for the verifying speech. Would like to remind them that I'm also a dino. I'd like to invite the member of government to open the second half of this debate. Here.
Hello, hi, hope you can hear me. I'm also a dino. I will not insult anyone. Okay, so I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think there is a great reason behind why kids that are coming from extremely rich, privileged, and career-oriented parents are often the most depressed cohort there are. And I do believe that this narrative pushes parents to behave in awful ways, in the end, harming the kids the most. I think so far, top half has been on how does this affect people who are in the workforce or who are out. However, I don't think they are actually the biggest stakeholder that we should care about, because primarily I do believe they're the ones which are to some extent having the agency to choose whether they want to respect this narrative or not. I don't think kids of these parents, right, have the same agency, and that's why our impacts are going to be solely focused on them, and that's why I do believe we will win this debate. Prior to going to my arguments, I just want to do a bit of weighing correctly points out almost all of their benefits are dependent on people not having kids because of this narrative, right? And I think this is just foolish, huge. As O points out, there's still many other pressures to have kids. And I truly do not think that outside of debate land, any parent decided to not have a kids primarily because of this narrative, right? But notice that to some extent, right, if this premise is not correct, a bunch of their impacts just do not stand, right? Second level of impacts that I have shitty towards their workers, right? I do believe this is correct and this is fine. However, what does happen when the culture of company is good, right? Notice that in the status quo, there's a bunch of extremely family-friendly companies to some extent, and they do it because of selfish interest, because they want to keep workers which are valuing family at the workplace, right? So that's why I don't believe a bunch of OOS harms actually do occur if these two instances that I mentioned are not fulfilled, right? That's why we'll focus on the internal pressures which everyone feels, even regardless of the fact whether your company is family-friendly or not. On OO, right? Notice that all of their claims are contingent on the fact that the alternative is people having kids very early. Notice that they almost never provide an explanation for this. They just assert it. Here's why it is very unlikely in the alternative world people will have kids when they're like 20, right? First of all, notice that bunch of our culture at the moment is incredibly individualistic, right? We want to experience the world for ourselves, right? Like we want to travel, we want to see the world. That is something which is very incompatible with kids. That's why majority of 20-somethings do not have kids at the moment. But secondly, this is to some extent, this is financially almost impossible. This is a POI that Josie asked, right? If I'm 20, right, I'm not an idiot and I want for my kid to have a good future, right? I see at the moment that that's not something which is financially responsible to do. That's why I will not have kids very early. So to some extent, right, bunch of OOS harm just do not occur because their alternative is just asserted, never explained. I think the likely alternative is people still have kids when they're like 25 or 30, like at the end of 20s and start of 30s, right? So to some extent, I don't believe they are that harmful. Okay, what then actually is our case, right? I think we'll have a very simple claim. People are worse parents because of these narratives, and kids are suffer a lot, right? Because as we said, and I think like OO kind of conceded, right? People will have kids anyway. And they will need to work anyway, because very often this is something which is financially responsible. And because a bunch of us actually do want to fulfill ourselves to work, right? I think this is completely fine to say, right? But what happens when I know that people at my job fundamentally think that to some extent me having family is incompatible with me advancing in the workforce? I think firstly, right, I get paranoid, right? I get paranoid that my colleagues and my boss will gossip around this, right? I get paranoid that my boss will perceive me as someone who is less worthy of promotion exactly because I'm maybe not that loyal to the company, right? Maybe I value my family far more than my job post, right? So to some extent, right, this is a fear which is very internal, right? And it can be very irrational, right? Our claim is not contingent on your company actually being shitty, but just on the fact that because of this narrative, bunch of people fundamentally get paranoid because all of us actually want to succeed at our job post, as OO says, right? And in the moment when I'm paranoid, right, I will likely to overcompensate it. And I'm going to explain the impacts for it later. But second of all, right, notice that very often when you don't succeed and you have family, right, you start to think that maybe the reason why you did not succeed or get that promotion was exactly because of your family, right? Exactly because you had a family, which means and shows that you're not maybe that dedicated to your job, right? This is something which often is just not true, right? Often you're not promoted because a bunch of other reasons, right? But people often seek the easiest explanation, and very often explanations which push the responsibility away from them, right? And this narrative is just like a perfect line to basically say, no, I wasn't promoted exactly because of my family. What are the impacts of this, right? Firstly, you're internally pressured to fundamentally work more and spend less time with your family, right? Because you want to overcompensate the fact that you have a family and you're constantly afraid that your boss will not perceive you as good enough, right? This is why very often, you will work long hours. You will miss birthday parties, you will trips, right? Very often, even when you're on vacation, you will still be responding to emails, right? But I notice that very often the biggest impact of this is not like fundamentally on you, but it is on the kids, right? The kids who very often grew up with a bunch of money, but very often grew up being raised by their nannies, right? Very often grew up thinking that their parents fundamentally do not love them because they did not spend that much time with them, right? So this is very often a belief which funds in you and basically is engraved when you're like 6 or 7, right? Exactly because you don't see your parents, right? Your assumption is that very often they don't think that you're worthy of their company, right? That they're prioritizing their job and they actually love their job far more, right? This means that when the kids grow up, right, this fundamentally creates more tensions, more fighting, and more emotionally unstable kids, right? Because they don't have the fundamental self-confidence that their parents thought that they were worthy of love and of attention. And I do believe the harm of this is just so fucking huge on the psyche of the kid. Second of all, very often parents also have a silent resentment towards their own kids, right? Specifically women, if they don't succeed at the workforce. This is very often silent shame about this, right? But very often, if they don't succeed, they feel that the reason why they did not succeed is because of their kids, right? So to some extent, they're far more likely to raise tensions with their kids because very often they will perceive that the kids just do not see the amount of sacrifices that they did for them, right? I sacrificed my promotion at my work because I had a family, right? This again creates much more ground for tensions and with bad parent-kid relationships, right? And this also harms kids, right? But really, not very often you will feel shame later in your life, right? Because to some extent, if you succeed and you're 45 and an executive, right? You very often just need to spend less time at work, right? But not that very often when you actually now at 45 or 50 actually want to engage with your kids, right? From you, right? Alienated from you, right? They very often feel a huge amount of remorse towards you, right? This is when all the shame kind of kicks in, right? This is where you basically are likely to feel that you are basically a shitty father, right? And this is where again the tensions will rise up again because I don't want to feel like I'm a shitty father, right? I need to come up with other narratives which I will kind of justify to myself. And the narrative is I will perceive my kids as ungrateful, right? How can you not be grateful for all the sacrifices and all the money that I gave to you? Again, this creates shame also in kids, right? Because they don't feel that the parents actually understands the amount of harm that was done to them because the parent prioritizes work all the time. Look, I don't think the biggest harm if I do this narrative will be on me. It will be on my kids. And that is something that should matter the most in this debate. Very proud to be post.
I thank the previous speaker for the very fine speech. I would like to invite the member of opposition to continue the case for opposition. Hey.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you well.
Wonderful. 3, 2. I'm going to first offer 2 responses to closing government, then go into our constructive. 1, the idea that people will massively overwork themselves and never see their kids. I would posit that the first response to this is a reality check. Most people don't work in management consulting and corporate law. They work in jobs that have upper limits on their time that probably are not easy to combine fully with family, but not impossible in the manner that closing out government characterizes, meaning that the issue is significantly less impactful than they flag. The second thing I would posit is that to the degree that you still have to work, and presumably have to work, at least one parent will have to work a reasonable amount, is that the resentment that they flag to, that they draw a lot of their remaining material from, is probably status quo, insofar as if you on government go home earlier to spend time with your kids, you still observe that the guy who doesn't have a kid and who therefore stayed longer got promoted over you. And I'm just going to be real with you. I think people are smart enough to observe that distinction and then still resent their kids. So unfortunately, I just don't think that claim is comparative. Moreover, though, I think that all of our material will respond directly to the notion of work-life balance, and in particular making work compatible with having a healthy family life, at which point, presumably just on quantity of cases affected, we are also doing them, because making the decision less urgent for people, given that they will still have to engage in the labor market, is probably more significant than their material. I want to talk about 2 constructive points. 1, about the experience of young women and girls, and secondly, about specifically fixing the situation that current labor situation is just incredibly poorly suited to the demands of working families, in particular with working parents and experience of young women and girls. Matt here says they'll get degrees more, and also says something to the same effect in DLO's speech. I want to actually characterize what the comparative on this looks like, in particular, why it is so much more than just getting the degree, but rather becoming the kind of person who can even make like properly evaluated choices on whether a degree is right for you. Framing. Having a career isn't the same as having a job. The pressure that opening government wants
in the system that this is that, how does your work-life balance get better once women have to balance both at-home duties and at-work duties?
I'll get on to that, but also broadly, I think there's just lots of reason why this is a universal pressure. I'm genuinely unclear why this pressure, unless it was actually analyzed in either team, doesn't apply to women. Cool. Let's go into why you improve work-life balance. OO for impact here is incredibly individualistic. It is true, someone who is successful in a career can probably get themselves private child care and therefore ameliorate their own situation. What we're going to prove to you is why the overall situation on work-family compatibility gets better. Two elements here. One, people desire family. I think babies are cute. I think you see families around yourself, but also they're just present in lots of cultural narratives, etc., blah, 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 insofar as it's incredibly unifying. On proposition, people who have family and who want to prioritize that will not progress to positions of power because they will prioritize family and therefore not get promoted because they're outcompeted on time spent at work. But also there's a snowball thing where as you have more people who don't value family as much at the top, that means that they also don't want to hire people who value family very much. I think that means that you have a situation work stays badly suited for the modern family situation of having both parents work. Insofar as you know, two working parents means in status quo, there's limited ability to ensure childcare if you don't have a lot of money. You can't respond to child emergencies. You can't spend a lot of time around them by having remote work. That means that the vast majority of people, whether they are successful in the career or not, cannot meaningfully combine their career with a family. On opposition, I think they succeed more because you work and you still prioritize your career, even if you still love a family and you would want that, because that is something that has been brought into you. But crucially, I think at one point, at least a decent number of those people will still have families and will still want to prioritize them. You care about that because you feel a pain, because at the point where you have a kid and you aren't able to spend time with them, you miss them and you don't like the fact that you aren't able to do so. That is something that means that within your own context, once you have actually progressed up a career ladder and you have some power and leverage in a company insofar as you set policy, you implement that so that it applies to yourself. But secondly, you are aware and understanding of the fact that it is important for other people because you want to have happy employees. You want to be an attractive workplace. You want to make sure that people are actually happy for you. You understand how important that would be for a decent number to combine family and work. That means that this change trickles down even to the people who don't have successful careers, meaning they are able to have and eat it too at the point where work-life structures actually adapt, which they never do on guide because people get sorted out of progressing. For all those reasons, please vote closing opposition.
I thank the previous speaker for the very fine speech.
Okay, starting my speech in 2, 1. Panel, first summer building, then weighing to top half, then rebuttal of closing opposition, then weighing us against top half. Let's first start with rebuttal, because the rebuttal we hear is basically that the idea that people massively overwork themselves needs to be reality checked because people have upper limits. Note a couple of things here. First of all, even people that don't work like the McKinsey type jobs, often in status quo have to work multiple jobs because they're low paying, oftentimes have to work shitty shifts like nurses, for example, working night shifts, prioritizing their job, etc. for income. It is not clear to me that it's only these upper echelon jobs that apply to our analysis. Presumably, the majority of jobs in today's workforce require some amount of overtime. Notice, however, that if they don't, and you naturally have all this overtime to spend on your family, then presumably the impact of the narrative itself is also just not that important on either side of the debate. Notice, even if it only applies to those highest level jobs, it is also not why those don't. The children of upper middle management not matter in this debate. That is not really right by closing opposition. Note finally that according to opening opposition, the whole point of the narrative, according to them, people do to maximize how much money they have. It is at best somewhat in tension with opening opposition, and at worst potentially a knife. I don't think it's actually a knife, but there is some question on what extent that then actually applies, and it is disagrees with what opening opposition told us is the primary thing opposition wants. Next, however, CO essentially adds further mechanisms and characterizations to opening opposition about how this impacts women and girls. Two things on this. First of all, most of those impacts are unclear why they act specifically from the role of female. It is unclear to us that this narrative only applies to women. Presumably it also applies to men, but even if it applies more to women, it is unclear why this is the narrative that does it as opposed to any of the other narratives around female empowerment in status quo. It is necessary for closing opposition to actually explain that to us. Maybe in the next speech, I don't know. Hopefully they'll take a POI from us if they to engage with that, because right now I don't have the chance to. However, I'm incredibly happy that Kat found fulfillment in mathematics. Really, I am. She's a good friend and her happiness is my happiness. That being said, it is not clear to me why she wouldn't have found happiness in mathematics on either side, regardless of the pressure to work or not. That, while anecdotally very persuasive, it does not inherently stem from the motion itself. It is necessary for them to link that to us. So far, it hasn't been linked, so I'm not clear on why I should evaluate that more highly than the significant impact on children that Marta highlights to you, in terms of why it's likely that parents are going to be more abusive to them because, you know, they're to blame for their lack of success in life, potentially. Two, that just generally children feel unloved because they're not prioritized and actively feel that they're deprioritized. Third, that because this is something you've internalized over, 10 years of your career, you're very likely to actually, because you've gotten used to it, and because you conditioned yourself to prioritize work consistently, and because of the narrative of this pressure, that also translates into how you rear your children. Even if you're doing all of this purely with the intent of being the best parent possible later down in life, it is still likelier that this actually makes you a worse parent down the line. Opening opposition wants to clash on that.
We are logically prior to every claim your case makes. The time and resource trade-off you put in towards attempting to form a family on your side makes it far harder at the point at which your family expansion stability by virtue of you working longer on our side and having more time to figure out what trade-offs you
That's 15 seconds. That's 15 seconds. No, you're not logically prior. Using a fancy word does not make it true, Matt. Let's be very clear. If POI to you that highlights that presumably people aren't idiots. People want to, people who really care about having families, presumably want to have, the necessary financial means to actually give to their children, food, shelter, clothing. Presumably these kinds of mechanisms exist either way. People who actually go through with having children at 18 before they have any financial prospect probably aren't impacted by this narrative on either side of the debate, because these people already are greatest good they could possible, that presumably they make that choice regardless. Most people change on the side of the debate. Most people actually be impacted by this narrative on the side of the debate aren't people that definitely don't want to have children, aren't people that definitely want children. It's the people on the margins in the middle that actually have the impact that you claim they will. The people that actually make tangible changes based on this narrative you claim, and you don't actually persuade me at any point in your speeches why, your narrative makes it more likely that you select all these things. Let's then weigh us against opening in general, right? Because I think the first thing to note is that OG's impacts squarely fall under what is good for the people making these choices, right? Our impact squares on what benefits the children. No, OG, I already took you, I'll take CO later. Our impact is therefore more important, because note that in top half, I'm not going to say it's a deadlock, because probably someone is winning it, but there is ultimately both of them agree that on both sides will have families, on both sides will have jobs, on both sides will want to do generally what's best to them. But what we explain in Closing Government is that the narrative of pushing yourself to prioritize work at the expense of your family is something that trickles down into everyday decision making, that actually changes the way you behave towards your children, both explicitly and implicitly, in terms of just your general behavior of deprioritizing your kids at the expense of your work. This kind of narrative harms your child's self-perception, makes them confident, feel less loved, makes them feel that they're not really wanted. Before I continue closing.
So Kat explains to you why having people who think families are important be at the top of the ladder makes it easier for everyone to have both with Kat's extension.
Yeah, that's because people who think that that families are important are probably not the most likely to be at the top of the chain. You don't actually prove that to us in your extension. You would have your side of the debate that the women who make the top of the career ladder are the ones who prioritize families to the extent you simultaneously claim. Presumably, those the women who prioritize family the most will probably have more conservative values, more religious values, all the stuff that OO actually ironically explains. To presumably prioritize that. Even on top, even if this narrative exists in society, meaning that at that point, if that's your comparative, I'm just unclear on why those are the most likely. In fact, you're significantly more likely to probably have women who deprioritize family on both sides of the debate, and they're then actually less likely to want to promote women who want to career because they themselves also deprioritize that, meaning that they see it as a more acceptable trade-off and therefore are less likely to want to make that trade-off. Ultimately, we come over opening over top hubs specifically because our impact, regardless of whether the work happens, the prioritization of family happens, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, the children who otherwise would not have the best possible parenting are more fucked under opposite, are less happy, are less fulfilled, have worse attachments to their parents, and are generally less happy. They don't have a choice in being born. Parents have a choice in giving birth. Proud to stand in closing government.
I thank the previous speaker for the very fine speech, and I would like to invite the closing opposition whip to close the debate as a whole. Yeah.
Can you please confirm that I'm audible?
Yep.
Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I will start with a bold and radical claim. If a motion does not specify, it probably refers to society. That it doesn't only affect 50% of it, or 49, or however many men are, but it probably also fucking applies to women. So I actually find it quite offensive. Both government teams, for some reason, think it's good rebuttal to say, oh, but why would the societal narrative change how women I do think that it is quite understood by pretty much all average intelligent voters that if family is something that is important, the vast majority of the work falls on women because of childbearing, because of childcare, because men can't really lactate, but also because it's just traditional that women are the ones who keep the house, and also because throughout this debate, it's been thrown around by both sides that, men have to provide for their families. No side of the debate has fiat or even attempts to provide to you any analysis on why women would be better off if family is something that is put on them. What we do have on this is a lot of empirical evidence of many, many centuries, and also a couple of decades of pretty much liberalism and where we did, because we did and we're still significantly more disadvantaged because they were told they're only there because they have to to earn a wage, but they should be content with being at the bottom of the ladder. They shouldn't aspire for a career. They shouldn't try to advance because how they get fulfillment and their role is at home raising children. That is why having put on people even more pressures to raise children than already exists and both sides of the house already exists, presumably is going to result in either women feeling those being oppressed by different ways, or simply, even if the men are the ones who hear it, guess what? It's still their female partners who are probably going to end up bearing the majority of the work. So I actually do think that what Kat explains to you, that if we tell everyone in society they should prioritize career over family, at least in the beginning of their careers, that probably significantly affects how girls. And OO already deals with the fact that they will probably, go to university if they think they need to get a career after that. But what Kat explains to you is that what you do with your life when you are in your formative years changes the way you view yourself in the life. As a woman, you had to be pretty, you had to be quiet, so that men like you, and so that you would have a boyfriend, because there was the measure of success. Lucky for me, I was also raised by doctors in a family of intellectuals to push me to be smart, because otherwise, I don't think I would have done any of the things that I did. Here's the difference here, and here's why it's important. On both sides of the house, women will be under pressure to have children and to have a family. On our side of the house, not only you don't add additional pressures for that, but you pressure, which acts as a balance, which Kat explains to you, makes it much easier for you to access all of the other things that could give you fulfillment, because you are told it's okay to access fulfillment from all of these other things. And by the way, I do think this also applies to men who don't want children or family. I think that this as well. And Kat also gives you analysis on why they're a lot more diverse. You're a lot more likely to seek them out if you think pursue is a fulfilling career. And that is the and you're probably going to be in a better financial situation. Or maybe some people won't. I don't know. However, the way that many people who are in their formative years and have a lot of time to think about themselves is going to change. Now, let's look at what government has been telling you. Because like CG talks a lot about like how, just men are never going to be at home and children are going to grow up neglected because their father is never at home. Like, one, I am unsure why more time spent together necessarily means quality time. Like, I am pretty sure that most people would rather see their parents a few hours less every week, if that means that the hours they do see their parents has a lot less financial stress, or those parents aren't coping with alcohol or God knows what else because they don't know how they're going to pay their bills, and they are not just being mean and miserable to each other, blaming themselves. But that's OO, so I'm not going to get more into that. I think OO also beats this. I think what is also important was what Kat explains to you, that the likelihood of you coming home after dinner, in time for dinner, is much, much higher if the people who are already prioritizing, who are going to exist on both sides of the house, just like some people are going to prioritize careers on both sides, are to pursue careers, and they are told it's okay, even if you want a family, it's okay to delay it, or it's okay to not prioritize it, it's okay to still go for a career. A lot of structural reasons why that means that in some cases, some of the positions of power will now be occupied by people who care about family that otherwise wouldn't have. Given that people usually get into positions of power when they're like in their 40s or 50s, I think that is perfectly at a stage where they already have kids, even if they've delayed it, as opening a position tells you. And I think the analysis Kat gives you and why that probably means that everyone has more access to work-life balance is something that hasn't been refuted by closing government, so therefore needs to stand in this debate and needs to be credited. Opening government, do you have a POI?
You're yet to prove why your side has the most accessible form of fulfillment, why women succeed in this career.
Yeah, I'm actually getting it.
Why money is fulfilling.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying money is intrinsically more fulfilling. I just think OG's view of it is flawed because they tell you $1 million in 5 years is what most debaters would get. Well, I assume most of the world is not debaters. I personally just took a